Today's guest is a U.S. Army Airborne Infantry veteran who is now serving his country as a law enforcement professional. As a sheriff's deputy for Valley County, Nebraska, he was the department's sniper and firearms instructor. He is currently the chief of police for Ord, Nebraska. Please welcome Police Chief Chris Grooms. Chief Grooms, how are you, sir?
Good. Yourself?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. Tell us about the city. Tell us about Valley County and the city of Ord. What is it like? How big is it? What's the population like there?
Sure. Population-wise, for the entire county's getting close to about 5,000 people. And then the county seat for Valley County is Ord, where I currently work. And it's a town of about 2,100 people. And that includes from farmers, ranchers, business owners, law enforcement, firefighters. We have a pretty good sized hospital, so we stay pretty active. The town's full of nice people, but what they experienced that we're going to talk about is to this day still bothers them.
What is the law enforcement footprint in Ord County? So the sheriff's department and your police department and any other city police departments, like what would you say, like on average, or just a rough estimate of the number of law enforcement officials that are in Ord County?
Yeah, so for the county, which is Valley, it's about 7 total law enforcement officers for the county, and then for the city, at the time when all these things were occurring, it was about 3 to 4 officers within the city of Ord. And then occasionally we would have state patrolmen, the Nebraska State Patrol, which usually was 2 to 3. So in whole, I would say anywhere between 9 and 12 on any given day.
And are there any military installations or nuclear facilities in or around the county?
No, not near the county. You'd have to go about an hour south of Valley County just to get to a National Guard facility.
And what kind of air traffic is in the vicinity? Is there a regional airport or a major airport? Like, what on an average night would you see helicopters flying around or anything like that?
Yeah, we occasionally have the National Guard flying up here, Chinooks, Blackhawks, just your typical flyover county with the big planes headed towards Omaha or Lincoln, Nebraska, or en route to Denver. Somewhere around there, but we do have a lot of crop dusters and little planes that do a lot of stuff for the farmers. So we do have a little bit of plane activity.
And Chief Grooms, like in the evening, is there much in the way of air traffic or any low altitude air traffic?
No, not really. No.
Okay. And in terms of airport, you don't have like a big regional carrier or anything close to the county what is it, the county again? Valley County.
Yep, Valley County. Yep. Here in Ord, we do have an airport, and we have had some landings by Chinooks and Blackhawks. But typically any planes that come land here are your small prop planes, your crop dusters, that type of stuff.
Now, Chief Grooms, on an average night, how quiet is it? Is there much in the way of cars or airplanes, high altitude airplanes going over? Like, how quiet is it? Are we just hearing coyotes and wildlife, or is there a lot of activity?
No, your typical night by 9:30, 10 o'clock, everybody's in home, getting ready for school or work the next day. So you don't typically see a lot of vehicle traffic past 10 p.m. Air travel, we do have a lot of flyover planes coming from the big cities, but that's from, sun up to sundown. So that's pretty typical. It's
not like you have a jet, a commercial jet flying at, say, like 5,000 feet or anything lower. It's just occasional military traffic. But would you say in the evening it is rare to have any kind of military air traffic?
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty rare out this way. Yep.
Understood. What is the closest military base to your city?
So military base for full-time active duty guys would probably be Offutt Air Force Base. which is about 3.5 hours southeast of where I'm currently located here in Ord.
And why did you decide to reach out to me?
Well, ever since this stuff happened back in 2019, late 2019, early 2020, it became pretty concerning, just some of the activity that we were having from witnesses calling 911, ranchers mentioning things about their cattle and horses kind of being harassed. It was just real unusual activity that we would see from drones. And we obviously don't have a lot of drone activity around here to start with. So all this that went down at that time when I was with the sheriff's office, we were reaching out to, the State Patrol, National Guard, FBI, Offutt Air Force Base, and we weren't getting any feedback. They didn't really seem that they knew what it was. I'm not saying they didn't, but it just seemed that way. They were very respectful and whatnot, but as far as getting back to us and wanting to, let us know what it was, they were very hesitant on that.
So, Chief Grooms, to the best of your ability, please walk us through this, these series of events. And this was in 2020, correct? Or was it just before 2020?
Just before 2020. We started seeing news reports coming out of Colorado of these things late 2019. And then unannounced to us, they're over the top of us. And we started getting 911 calls from, witnesses coming home from work or going to work, people just outside minding their own business. Just tons of 911 calls coming from ranchers even. Hey, there's these things flying around in my pasture. To a certain point, it got to, hey, these things are harassing my horses. So we started getting pretty serious with it when we were getting 911 call after 911 call for two weeks straight. And
during these 911 calls, were people fearful of what they were seeing, or did they think I was, some kid with a drone harassing their cattle? What was the sort of tenor or the sort of emotion that you would hear or the dispatcher would hear in these calls?
Yeah, I would say at the beginning it was kind of a, oh, look, these things are in the sky, he, ha, ha, ha. And then after the first couple nights, it started turning into, hey, what are these things? What is going on? How come nobody knows anything? Why isn't the larger elements of law enforcement out here? And then it started becoming concerning for the local populace.
So you receive 911 calls and you guys are dispatched to locations. How did all of that happen?
Yeah, well, once a call would come into our regional dispatch center, they would pass it along to whoever was on duty, which a lot of the nights it was me and another deputy or our sheriff or the local PD officer. And if the call was in town, it went to the PD. And if they requested our assistance through the sheriff's office, we would go help. But if they were out in the county, it would come back to us at the sheriff's office. And we would essentially get as much information as we could from the dispatch through the witness. And then we would head that direction. And typically the calls would come through and you would say, yeah, okay, sure, they're seeing 20 of these things. No, okay, whatever. And then, yep, we'd get there and there they were, just making no sense to us on patterns and why they were even here.
So you would go to these 911 calls, you would drive out there in your patrol vehicle and you would see these things. Describe what on your first response making contact with whoever was reporting these things. You drive up, it's at night. What do you see?
Well, the first actual recall that I saw these on a personal level, not only was I on duty, but it came from my actual sheriff. And he had called me directly and said, hey, bro, you got to get out here. And, we had a call on this stuff. I'm here. I'm trying to pursue it. But if you can come out and help me, I'd appreciate it. And, I was out the door. So as I was driving in a southerly direction down Highway 11, I could see some some flashing lights off in the distance. And I ended up calling my sheriff back saying, yeah, I see it. I see it. I'm coming to your location. And this thing would not let us get close enough to it. I mean, it just continued to move away as we would try and approach it. But it wasn't very high in the air, maybe 60 feet at the highest level. The one thing that we found to be very weird about it was it stayed near the roads. It paralleled the roads as we approached it. So no matter how much we got close to it, it would move away, but it would stay near the roads to where we could continue to pursue it. It was almost like it was messing with us.
Were you going to someone's house or residence?
I don't know exactly what the call came into the sheriff was, other than, hey, these things are out here again tonight. You know, what's going on? And that's the sheriff being a good sheriff. He went to go take a look at it.
Okay, so the sheriff calls you out to respond to this call. Were you responding to a place of residence?
No, I assume from what the sheriff had told me is that somebody was just coming into town and saw him, and we had reports at that time the nights prior, so it was getting to the point where we were responding to him no matter what the situation was. So I assume the call came to the sheriff, and you know, he went to go do his due diligence, and you know, there they were. So he called me out to help him.
So you drive up and you see what as you're approaching?
Yeah, as I'm approaching, and I'm probably maybe about 400 yards away from it, because I could see my sheriff's vehicle, you know, to my south, and that thing was to the southwest of his vehicle. So it was probably about 400 yards from me, approximately 60 feet in the air, and I just saw lights. It looked pretty large. So I continued to go towards him, and I let him know, yep, I have eyes on. But the funny thing is as we approached it, it would move away from us. And, we noticed that as it was moving away from us, it would stay parallel to the roads, and it would parallel the roads. So it was almost like it was toying with us. It didn't want us to see it fully, but it still wanted to let us know, hey, you know, I'm here, come get me, you know. And eventually, as we continued to pursue it down some gravel roads, it moved off in one direction. We couldn't pursue it no more because we had come to a dead end. And it seemed to disappear almost. I don't know if it shut its lights off or what, which is illegal. But I assume it either shut its lights off or it just shot straight up in the air, but it disappeared. We couldn't track it no more with our own eyes.
So Chief Grooms, describe the lights. What did they look like? Did they flash? Did they look like a normal, like sort of aircraft light, an aircraft position light? Were they brighter than normal, dimmer than normal? Was there anything unique about them?
Well, I can certainly tell you that they were not FAA approved or regulated by any means. Sometimes when we would interact with these things, it would just be a solid light. Sometimes there were multiple blinking lights. It from call to call, it varied. And there was other times where, like I had said earlier, it would almost be like they would disappear or they would turn their lights off.
And when you were approaching these lights, did you have your light bar on?
I did not have my overheads on, no. And we had our regular, you know, dims and brights on as we were traversing the gravel road, but we didn't have a searchlight on. We didn't have our overhead emergency lights on or anything like that. And
when you, at any point during this response, did you stop your patrol vehicle?
Yeah, when we come to some of the intersections, we, you know, kind of made a plan like, hey, you go this route and I'll go this route and see if we can't intercept this thing, you know, coming from two different angles. And it just didn't matter. It knew where we were at. It knew what we were doing. We just couldn't get close enough to it to identify its actual size or what it actually looked like.
Would you roll down your window to listen to it, to see if there was any noise?
Yeah. On numerous occasions, we would roll down our windows just to see if we could hear propellers or a hum or, a turbine or something like that.
Was there any interference that you had with your police radio or your vehicle?
Nope. As far as I know it, within my department, we never had any communication problems, whether through radio or even talking on our cell phones.
So you respond to that call with the sheriff. What was your next encounter with these things?
Well, it would have probably been within about a week. I mean, obviously it's been a while, so trying to remember it as close as I can. Sure. I'd say it was about a week later. I was actually at home, and again, the sheriff had called me and said, "Hey man, I'm currently busy. There's a lot of drone interaction down south of North Loop, which is in my county, and Scotia, which is to the southeast of my county. They don't have a good law enforcement presence over there, so we help over there as much as we can." And they were having 911 calls about, hey, there's drones basically circling the town. So it was kind of scaring people. So they were calling. And my sheriff asked me if I could fly down there. So I hopped in my patrol vehicle and headed that way. And it's about a 12, 13 mile drive from where I was at to Scotia. And I happened to come down eastward down Highway 22. And in order to go into Scotia, you have to turn and head south down Highway 11. So I had to come to the junction of Highway 22 and Highway 11. And as I stopped at the junction to turn to head south, I happened to look left. And when I looked left, North Loop, which would be to my left about 3/4 of a mile, there's a giant co-op building, and that co-op building has a big red light on top of it. And I would say it's anywhere between 100 to 150 feet high. And I happened to just see to the east of the red co-op light another large orangish reddish light. And of course I'm going, well, that's not the co-op building. So I looked right real quick to check my other direction of travel, and I looked back left again, and that thing had covered close to 3/4 of a mile in 2 to 3 seconds. And I was kind of stunned because I'm pretty familiar with aircraft and whatnot from my military experience, and I couldn't believe it that something that could travel that fast without no noise. And I didn't have my window up at that time, and my vehicle was running, obviously, and at that time I drove a Ram 1500 pickup truck. But at that low of altitude, and it to be able to cover that distance, there should have been an ample amount of noise, and there was nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing that you would think would make a sound from a drone, even. No prop wash, none of that noise. It was completely silent. Yes, it was dark, but it was stunning. It blew my mind. And when it flew past me or flew right in front of my windshield, it was still that brightish orange red color. I couldn't make out if it had, wings or a tail or any of that stuff, or if it had windows. I couldn't see none of that. It was just a bright orangish color. And the one thing that I thought was weird, as it went by me at that speed, there was contrails behind it. So I didn't know how to regulate that am I looking at a plane? What is this? But at the same time, I'm like, hey, I got to get to Scotia because of all the people that are freaking out over there. So I turned and headed south down Highway 11 to continue towards Scotia, and this thing was gone. I mean, it was gone. The horizon, the hilltops, I have no idea where it went. Like that, and it was gone. So as I turned into Scotia, there's a bridge that you have to cross, and it's the North Loop River right there. Well, I stopped at the river to try and get out of my truck and get a little bit higher up on my truck to see if maybe I could see something. And by that time, somebody had come pulling up next to me in their vehicle. and it had a couple people in it that I know them. They're good folks, and they were actually going into Scotia because they're on the volunteer fire department, and they were actually going over to look what was going on in Scotia because they were hearing the radio chatter. So they jumped out, and I just looked at them. I said, "Please tell me you guys saw that." And they said, "Yep, oh yeah, we saw it." But that night I didn't really think about all of that, of what took place, because I was still trying to let it register in my mind. But within a few days, as I was recollecting everything, I just started thinking how weird it was that the minute this large, brightish orange looking thing flew by me at just crazy speeds with no sound. And then as I'm pulling into Scotia, all of these supposed littler ones that were on the outskirts of Scotia, essentially harassing the town and making people freak out, they disappeared. They were gone. The minute the big looking thing took off, these things left Scotia, and the rest of the night we had no more 911 calls or anything about it. It was weird.
When your vehicle was stopped and you saw this big orb of light, what would be the size you would estimate it to be?
I would say it was easily the size of my Ram 1500 pickup truck, and I'm driving, the crew cab, so it had the 4 doors. It's a pretty good sized truck.
And when this thing, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if people want an idea of the size of that, they're fairly big, the Ram 1500. So I would say it was easily the equivalent size of that.
And this again was around 50 to 60 feet above the ground?
No, that night I would say it was closer to that 150 feet up, just because it was flying pretty close to the same level as the co-op tower was.
And what would you estimate its distance was from you to the object?
Well, when it flew out in front of me, I would say that it was probably within, throwing distance of a football or something like that. But as far as at its height level, it was probably 100 feet.
Did you notice if it illuminated the surrounding terrain, illuminated, the ground near your vehicle? Was there anything odd about that, or did it behave like any large light source would have at that distance?
No, from what I recollect, it wasn't lighting up anything on the ground. And I mean, I could have missed that because I'm just like, holy cow, what is this thing? But the light is odd. I don't understand how that light was like that. And there was no noise. And then the contrails, which typically you see from a jet, but it's just odd. That's all I can say about that night. It was so weird.
And in terms of when you say there's something odd about the light that it was emanating, was it the color or how it looked to your eye? What feels odd, or what felt odd about it, if you think back?
I mean, that night it was just bright, but there was nothing else to it. There wasn't flashes. It wasn't blinking. It was just bright, but it wasn't directional, I guess, if that's a correct word to use. It wasn't directional, as in it wasn't in front of it. It wasn't shining off to the sides. It was just there. The light was just there.
Did it look like looking at, say, a welding arc, like that kind of intensity, or easier on your eyes?
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to put it. It was bright. I mean, I obviously I could look at it. It wasn't hurting my eyes, but it was just a big bright light, and there was no direction, like my headlights point forward when I'm going down the road. It wasn't like that at all. So
this particular light, it was incredibly intense, like a welding light or welding arc, like looking at a welding arc. Did you have to shield your eyes or anything when you looked at it?
No, I didn't have to shield my eyes or nothing. It wasn't that bright, and perhaps it just could have been because I was at a distance from it. So as far as it was blinding me or anything like that, no.
The following day, when you're thinking about this, Were you trying to think, was this an airplane, or were you beginning to recognize that this was likely something that may not have had a human origin?
I obviously was thinking a lot of things.
Sure.
Because I wanted to know what it was, and having my military background and knowing how, an operation works and mission planning and stuff like that, it just didn't make sense if it was us, if it was our military, or even a private company doing stuff. Why are they near small town Nebraska? Why are they flying around small towns? It just didn't make sense. So at that point, that's when we started making our phone calls, trying to figure out, hey, is this Air Force? Is this a private company? And yeah, I started thinking, maybe this isn't from planet Earth, or, isn't China or Russia or even us. I started to think about a lot of things.
What was the reaction from the sheriff? Did you go into the sheriff's department the following day and he's on his office on his phone? How was the sheriff handling all of this?
Yeah. Well, I'll just back up a little bit if that's all right.
Please.
So that night, when myself and a few other people on the bridge had witnessed that thing, I did call the sheriff pretty quickly after that interaction happened, and started to kind of make the comment that, you're not going to believe this, but, and as soon as I got out the word but, pardon my French, but he said, no shit, you saw it too. And it made sense, because where he lived at the time, that thing probably would have flew directly over him, if not near his residence. So he saw it too. And at that point, it started to really concern him, because he's an intelligent guy. He's been in law enforcement a while. He knows that that's not normal activity, by even if it was drones, just for what was going on. It served no purpose. So yeah, the next morning when I come into work to basically start making phone calls, he was already in the office, and he had 2-3 phones just near his face, calling people, trying to figure out who this could be or what it could be.
Who again was the sheriff specifically calling regarding these events?
Well, that morning, I know he had relayed to me that he was in contact with Offutt Air Force Base. I don't know the exact name of the HR person that he was on the phone with, but they basically gave him it's not us. It's not the Air Force. We're not doing that type of activity. We contacted the Nebraska State Patrol. They don't have that technology. They weren't up here doing things like that. I did call down to the National Guard out of Grand Island, and they weren't doing anything like that up here. So pretty much everybody that we talked to gave us no, that's not us. And essentially, we don't know at this time what it is either.
Following these calls, was there any follow-up from, FBI or FAA or any of these other agencies? Like, did they call a week later and say, hey, are these things still flying around, or was it radio silence from those federal agencies?
Yeah, we never really got a call back or a follow-up or anything from anybody.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, please.
I was just going to say the people that I did have follow-ups from were people like Christopher Mellon. He seemed pretty concerned. I had a long conversation with him. We were on the phone for probably about an hour. He was very concerned. He clearly was finding this to be very concerning. I was in contact with a reporter from the New York Times. I guess maybe you don't want me to say her name, but she actually followed up with me numerous times, and she seemed pretty concerned and would like to get to the bottom of it. I spoke to a journalist out of Colorado who was a journalist for the DOD. and him and I had conversations over the phone and emails and whatnot. And yeah, he pretty much was giving me the same gist of everything as, yeah, it's not us. We don't know what it is. And he actually did an actual article on these things. And the article basically read just as he was telling me that, yeah, we don't know what it is.
I want to go back again to one of the nights, or any of the nights. We'll say perhaps one of the nights that had the most volume of radio calls. 911 calls. What was the radio traffic like between officers? Was it, I guess what I'm asking, was it like more than one officer responding to a call? Was there much sort of tactical communication between officers during one of the busiest events?
Yeah, there was communication between us as, hey, you try and go down this road and we'll try and, intercept it from different angles, to, hey, go over here and set up on this high point with your binoculars while we try and maneuver on these things with our vehicles. So there was coordination to the best that we could do with what we had.
The communications from the other officers, like, when I listen to you, Chief Grooms, you're, very calm, very matter of fact. Did you sense any fear in any of the other officers, or like panic or anything like that, or was it just, very sort of matter of fact, don't know what these things are?
I think it was a mixture of everything. I mean, towards the end, it not only was becoming an annoyance because we just couldn't catch them, we couldn't figure out what they were, nobody was telling us anything, but also, we don't want our community to be worrying about this stuff as much as they were at the beginning. But we also didn't want accidents out on the highways when people were trying to find these things themselves and running across the highways and running stop signs. And I'm not saying they were doing that, but that is one thing that we were concerned about, was, are our accidents going to go up because there's so many people out? So there was concern at a lot of different levels. Not only these things being in our county, messing around with ranchers, cattle and whatnot, but just also other people's safety from staying out of accidents and things like that.
I want to talk a little bit about the interaction of these drones with cattle. Describe if you can, in detail, what those interactions were like, how many of them were there, what was the reaction from the ranchers of these things?
Towards the end of it, when we couldn't figure out what they were and what they were doing here, we were, this is Nebraska, so we were starting to get those answers from the ranchers about, if these things keep messing, with my horses and I got to go round up my cattle every morning, it was pretty much coming down to, well, if the government's not going to look into it and do anything, we're just going to try and shoot them down. And, we're sitting there saying, hold on, let's not go to that yet. Let's, continue. But I understood where they were coming from. That's their livelihood. That's their property. So I understood that side of it. But as far as when these things would show up, I received a phone call one night from a rancher, and he had stated to me, these things are essentially lighting up his pastures with lights, almost like a searchlight or something like that. And it was starting to really bug him because it was making his animals move away from where he had left them. And, he'd have to go out at 4 or 5 in the morning and round them all up and get accountability of everything. And it just became a nuisance. But yeah, he had made the comment that whatever these things were, they had lit up his cattle and he could see it doing it. And it made him irritated. So he went out to go try and, chase it off or whatever he thought he was going to do. But it just took off. It just left. It's almost like it knew it was coming. The
description from the ranchers of these things, did any of the description of these vehicles match, or these airborne vehicles, did any of them match what you had seen or any of the other officers had seen? And did the rancher report any like sounds like a helicopter or anything like that?
Yeah, it was typically the same thing that we experienced at at our level with the no noise. Sometimes it was blinking lights, sometimes it was a solid looking light, and like I said, it just was starting to really irritate people that there was nothing we could do about it, and it seemed like the government either knew what it was or they just didn't know what it was, so they were shunning it off, hoping it would just go away. I don't know what they were thinking, but that's what it seemed like.